It's been a while being here in Ardmore, Oklahoma, and glad to see each one of you. See some familiar faces and also some faces that are new. But this issue of COVID has obviously racked the nation, and it's a major focus every day on the media or other places or newspapers or wherever you tune in, internet, etc. If there's a writing utensil for me, we can use this board. There's been over 150,000 deaths in this country since the first deaths in February. Actually, they believe now the first deaths were at the end of January in the Bay Area, actually in California, not too far from where we're at. And it has affected every state. It's affected almost every country. There's a few countries, very small countries, that are not been affected. I actually have an employee that works for me that does a lot of the COVID testing. She's from Palau, and that little tiny nation still has not had a single COVID case. But it has less than the population of Ardmore, Oklahoma, in the entire country and island. And of course, they have been, with the shutdown of travel and things, it did help protect them. But a lot of times people get this idea that we just have to try to prevent COVID at all costs. And I'd like to just use the acronym COVID here tonight. And the first acronym, or the first C, would actually stand for what this is about, and that is COVID protection. And sometimes we get the idea that if we hunker down at home and do nothing and the whole country shuts down, that we could actually eliminate this problem. And that actually is not true, despite the ideas that some get. This virus is here. It is going to be here for a while, and if we all hunker down at home and the country is shut down and all businesses are shut down, it is still going to spread. So why is it that we actually did that? The reason why we did it was to what is called flatten the curve. Flatten the curve means that it doesn't rise so exponentially that it overwhelms our intensive care unit systems and our hospital systems. And we've actually pretty much accomplished that, particularly in Oklahoma. If you see on the screen there, and sorry, a lot of you aren't going to be able to see that, but this is just the report that came out today, the COVID-19 report, July 31, 2020. Thank you. And you can see there's still 19% of ICU beds available in Oklahoma. So if we hadn't flattened the curve, earlier that would have overwhelmed the system, and then you have to start selecting who goes to ICU, who is on a ventilator, and those sorts of things. You can see the medical surgical beds, 20% of those beds are available. Notice the operating room beds. That's a huge number, but 59% of operating rooms or operating room time is not being used. And that actually is far higher than what it would be if we didn't have COVID. Why do you think there's so many operating room beds available? Because people are fearful of getting elective surgeries done. And so elective surgeries are at an all-time low. And pediatric beds available. You can see a large amount of pediatric beds available, 41%. Those are pediatric intensive care unit beds available, 30%. And notice this, ventilators available. You've heard of maybe ventilator shortages, not in Oklahoma. As you can see there's 1,194 ventilators available in the state, and 820 of them are available. So that means really less than 1 in 3 are actually in use. So we have a lot of capacity in this state for more ventilators if need be. And of course, if ICUs fill up, it's not going to be the end of the world because we can turn other sections of the hospital over to function as ICUs. And then negative flow rooms available. Those are things that can help prevent the spread and keep it contained. And 42% of those rooms are available. So in regards to COVID protection, I think we can say, at least in Oklahoma and virtually all other aspects of the country, there's a few sections that had issues with this. New York City had an issue, and there's some metropolitan areas that are a lot worse off than this as far as that goes. But I think we have successfully flattened the curve. And as a CDC, the head of the CDC today said that there are basically 5 things that if you do them, they are as good as hunkering down at home and not going out and totally shutting down the country. I don't know, did anyone hear what those 5 things were? One of them is what most of you are doing here tonight. You're wearing a mask, and so wearing a mask can be helpful. Now, of course, if you were taking care of a COVID patient, we wouldn't want you to just have a face covering on. We would want you to have a very good mask, an N95 mask or better. And of course, if they're giving aerosolized treatment, you would want to have a PAPR on. This is where you kind of look like you're in a space suit and you have to get your air from an outside source. You kind of wear this thing on your belt, and the air intake goes in. And of course, there's charcoal filters there and things like that, preventing, even better than charcoal filters, preventing that COVID from coming in. But in general, a regular mask, particularly if you're distancing, and that was the other thing. Now, I don't like the term. You just heard from Joel how we deal with mental health issues. And really, this is a misnomer that's used, and the CDC used it again today. They called it what type of distancing? Social distancing. And even before, if you read the Bible, the days of creation were all counted as very good. But even before sin came into the world, God issued the statement, "It is not good." Does anyone know what was after "it is not good"? It is not good for man to be alone. And so social distancing is actually producing an uptick, significant uptick in mental health conditions. Anxiety is at an all-time high. Depression is also at an all-time high. Actually, family feuds are also at an all-time high. And we see a lot of uptick. In fact, suicide rates are higher as well. And so, although we have done a lot here to try to protect ourselves from COVID, in some ways we have lost track of maybe some of the risks in doing some of these things that might actually, not necessarily outweigh the benefits. This is why to turn into the news media and listen to a so-called expert can be a little confusing, because that expert is maybe an expert in one area, but not in a lot of areas. And so he might, say some things here that sound like, okay, we're going to really try to protect the spread of COVID, but the measures can be on the extreme end and can actually increase our risk of a number of other diseases, including depression and anxiety. And so that's why it often takes, someone like an internist who is somewhat of a specialist in all the different internal organs to balance this out. And this happens even in regards to ICU before COVID came in. I know as an ICU doctor, I would go in and the pulmonologist would be ordering Lasix to get rid of the fluid in the lungs because of the breathing issues. And then the kidney doctor would go in saying, this patient needs more fluid because these kidneys are suffering, and then want to give more fluid. And they're all doing their little specialty areas to try to take care of their own little turf areas. And then you need someone in an ICU setting that has the global picture to say, okay, now we need to balance this out. we don't need to dry out the lungs that much, and we don't need to give this much fluid, but we need to try to find that happy medium and the balance part of things. And right now, in general, when you turn into the news media, it's not necessarily balanced. You're getting experts in this area and that area, but not really looking at this whole aspect of things. For instance, in all this COVID protection, it's very unusual for anyone to talk about how the suicide rates are up, how the depression rates are up. Now, it's possible to have physical distancing, however, without social distancing. I'll tell you, in our first program post-COVID, and as Joel mentioned, we run a program every month, and in California, almost every month, and in California, our business was seen as essential. They wanted our school to shut down. They wanted all of that to shut down, but the mental health aspect of things, they said, you're not shutting that down because we still believe in mental health, and you're not shutting New Start down because we still believe in protecting people from heart disease and cancer and diabetes, and that was the physical part of the diseases that we treat at Weimar Institute, and so those shall remain open. And so our first group that came in after this in regards to our mental health, first of all, it was only half the amount that we'd normally receive because everyone was afraid of traveling. By the way, the safest time to travel in human history was actually after they shut down travel. Erica was flying back and forth from Dallas to Sacramento, and sometimes there was 4 people on that plane, and very much distancing, and all sorts of protective measures in place. But yet people were fearful of traveling, even though it was safer to travel then than it was pre-COVID, because you could get the flu and die from the flu, and no one was wearing masks and those type of things. But still, because of that generalized fear, we only had half capacity, and we had to test everybody when they came in. And those tests took several days. So everyone was wearing masks at first, and we had to have them physically distanced as far as their eating and things like that. Normally they would eat together with the staff. But with a smaller group, and all of them being physically distanced, we found a dynamic that was rather interesting. And that is, no one was having any private conversations. There was no click. The group was all together, and you had to speak up when you're 6 feet apart. And when you spoke up, everybody else in the group could hear too. And so everybody got interested in everybody else in the group. Normally the teenagers all kind of go together, and then the people that are parents and have little kids, they all go together. They feel like they figure out who identifies with them the most, and they tend to do that. But we had the old and the young, although I can tell you on that first program, after COVID, we didn't have any old. The oldest person we had was 45 because none of the elderly were interested in traveling because they all thought they might die as a result of traveling, even though they had significant depression and anxiety. And so the social dynamic, actually, our staff mentioned, was even better because we had no cliques. And we kind of noticed the same thing in the cafeteria at Weimar College. There was physical distancing there too before the students were sent home, and everyone had to speak up, and everyone in the cafeteria was part of the conversation. So there was one conversation going on, and this group today is still very close to each other, and they had an exceptional time in improving their mental health. And they got in a position where they were certainly more improved in these areas to help us. So one of the things I'd like to talk about here today is what happens if you get COVID. And the reason why I want to talk about this is because if COVID continues the way it is, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And some of the models showed that 70 to 80% of Americans eventually are going to get this disease. And it's certainly, how many positive cases have we had nationwide? We're well over several percent. I think it's somewhere around 5% of the population now has had COVID in America. And if you look at the case reports, it's going up every day, even here. Let's see if we could maybe flip that down. We'll see some of the cases in Oklahoma keep going down. So COVID, well, it tells you how many testing supplies are available. Lots of testing supplies available in Oklahoma. Here we have total cases, 36,487, and newly reported cases, 747. Of today's new cases, 94.4% of specimens were collected July 16 to 30. So, you know, quite a few new cases, and you can see the new deaths today as well, 5 new deaths, so a total of 541 deaths now in the state of Oklahoma. I looked at Carter County. You can go down and start breaking it down into county, and Carter County has been spared a great deal compared to a lot of other counties. And I'm not necessarily surprised. I practiced here for 26 years, and the average Carter County resident is lucky to go to Texas maybe once a year. Most of the Carter County people stay put. They're not intermingling much with the outside world. And a lot of the outside world doesn't come to Carter County. You know, it's not known as one of the highest tourist areas in the country. And so it has, as a result of that, as far as the flattening of the curve part, the curve is still probably on the accelerated part. It can still come here to Carter County, and I think it will. But we need to really plan on what we're going to do when we get this disease, because what happens is, let's go down a little further here. If we take a look at the, let's keep going. Well, no, let's go back up again. These are all the different tests. But by the way, this is a website that everyone can get and keep up with the latest here. Keep going towards the top. I wanted to see what we had 36,000 cases, 541 deaths, and how many in the hospital? Let's see if we can find it here. How many hospitalized patients? It may be coming down further before we get there. Let's see. COVID-19, hospitalized ever, 3,161. So a little less than 10%. Let's say 10%. So out of all the COVID positive patients, 10% are going to end up in the hospital. So let me write this. 10% hospitalized. So out of the 300, and let's see, how many did it say were hospitalized? 3,161. How many deaths? 500? 541. So 541 divided by, so, you know, we're up there to maybe 15 to 20% of those hospitalized are going to die. So let's just, for round it up, 10% hospitalized, 20% of these will die. And of course, another 20% are going to, out of these that die, virtually all of them are going to be on a ventilator, almost. And another 20 to 30% are going to need to have ventilator support at the hospital. And by the way, if you are in this group that does survive, there's a problem after you're off of the ventilator. And it's often, this is what is called the long haulers. Long haulers are ones that continue to have symptoms and don't seem to be getting rid of them. They have fatigue, they have shortness of breath, they might need to be on oxygen the rest of their life. And although they survived, it debilitated them, even after it's over with. And then another half, let's say 50%, will come out of there and be able to go back to normal. So what often isn't talked about in regards to where the media is at is, how do you become part of the 90% that will not need hospitalized services? Right now, if you go to the emergency room and you test positive for COVID and your oxygen levels are fine, what are they going to do with you? They're going to send you home. And they're going to say, go home, and if you get worse, come back. But they're not going to really tell you anything to be able to do to try to prevent you from having to come back. And what I would like to go through with you the rest of here in regards to the acronym is what we can do to prepare for getting it. Now, you may not get this disease for the next year. You may not get it the next 6 months. So what I want you to think about is a long-term plan, something that you can start implementing maybe today as a result of this presentation, but a long-term plan on getting your immune system in good shape so that you don't go into the cytokine storm. These people that are hospitalized, particularly this group here, has what's called a cytokine storm. And this cytokine storm, this is kind of an interesting virus because unlike the flu, when you contract the flu, in 2 days later, you can be deathly ill. Not so with COVID. You contract COVID and you've been exposed to it, and you may not even feel sick until about 6 or 7 days. And then when you feel sick, you're not going to be really that sick. You might even just have some subtle symptoms like a little bit of diarrhea, a little loss of sense of smell. And then you might start developing a dry cough, and you think, well, this isn't bad, this can't be COVID or whatever. And then you might be tested, and sure enough, it is COVID. And what you want to do, because this virus multiplies at a rate, and our immune system doesn't think it's that big a deal because it's very much like a cold virus. The difference is it has these spikes on it, but the immune system senses a cold virus. It doesn't really try to go after this thing that aggressively. But once the immune system realizes it's not getting it and it's starting to get out of control and now it's exponentially going forward, that's when your immune system can say, whoa, we are not doing the trick at all. We need to pour everything into this, and we need to go through World War III and try to get rid of this virus. And the World War III ends up killing more friendly fire than it does the virus. And because it's secreting all of these toxins to try to get rid of the virus, and it ends up depleting our cells from all sorts of good things and breaking our cells open and getting all this inflammation in. And it's actually our immune system at this point, because it wasn't very healthy to begin with, that we end up developing this cytokine storm and end up in a very serious state. So let's go through what the data is showing us on COVID. And very interestingly, it also showed us this in the last serious pandemic we had in this country. When was the last serious pandemic we had? 1918. It was 1918. By the way, were there more deaths from that pandemic or more deaths from COVID? More deaths. Far more deaths from the 1918 pandemic, and that was the flu. The flu is also an RNA virus, and it killed literally millions of Americans, percentage-wise, per capita, much more serious problem than what we're dealing with today. And in the flu pandemic, this O was very important, and we're finding out it's also very, very important for us to be in this 90% that never gets hospitalized. Anyone want to guess what the O is? If we have this O, in other words, we're much more likely to be hospitalized if we get COVID. The O stands for? And really, we can say it's not just obesity, it's being overweight. Now, overweight is between a BMI of 25 to 30, but overweight really suppresses our immune system. And what the flu pandemic showed is the best BMI for someone to be able to recover from the flu if they get it is a BMI between 17.5 and 20. That means that you're actually very thin. Very thin people that are healthy. If you're not thin from being a tobacco smoker, because some people, there's a lot of models that actually keep themselves thin by smoking tobacco. And of course, that's going to be an issue. Tobacco smoke doesn't go well with either one of these viruses. But if we're thin and healthy, you're not seeing those people die from COVID. They are not being hospitalized for COVID. They're actually recovering quite well. And so, even when I realized this myself, I'm not down here in this BMI level here, but I thought, I need to start doing things a little differently and get my BMI down to that mean, lean value. And it's going to help your immune system. Now, one of the things that they mentioned, and it's actually a false thing. Let's see if there's something false on this report, and I want to point it out to you. Let's go up a little bit first. Maybe it'll have it here. Let's see, it talked about comorbidities. Let's go back down again. Okay, here it is. 76.3% deceased cases had at least what? One comorbidity. But notice what they mentioned on comorbidities. Diabetes, heart disease, circulatory disease, chronic lung disease, liver disease, or renal failure. What are they not mentioning here? If we put obesity in that list, it's virtually 100% comorbidities. And of course, this is good news. This means there is something that we can do now to help us if we get this disease of never, going into this hospitalized state. And so if you add obesity to this, in fact, I saw a news report the other day, and of course the news likes to dramatize things at times, but there was this 17-year-old kid who had no comorbidities who died. And of course that became top news. But you saw the picture of the kid. He was morbidly obese at 17. No comorbidities. In other words, he didn't have high blood pressure yet. He would have developed it. He didn't have diabetes yet. He would have developed that. But the obesity aspect of things was a major comorbidity for this sad case of a 17-year-old. And so this is something that we can do something about. All right, the V. And by the way, it's exponential. Once you see that BMI go above, particularly 21, 22, you start seeing increased complications. When it gets above 25, significantly increased complications if you get COVID. If it gets above 30, it's even more. If it's a BMI of 40, you can just see that big, giant exponential curve of the obese in the land ending up being hospitalized. And it's one of the reasons why our country has had more problems with this than some other countries. Because, if you travel around the world, not all countries have the rates of obesity of America. We're up there near the top. And so it's one of the reasons why we're now at the top as far as number of deaths from COVID. We actually have more deaths from COVID than China does. Which do you think has more of a problem with obesity, America or Chinese? It's much higher in America. And so this is something that we can do something about. And of course, what can we do about it? Let's just talk about it a little bit. In the New Start program, this is one of the major reasons why people come to our 19-day New Start program. And everyone that needs to lose weight loses weight there, but what do you think they're doing with them? That's right. No soda. That's right. The sugar intake is eliminated. You also have a low-fat diet. You have exercise. And they also start out with something else that's been shown to be very good at controlling your weight. It's called ketosis, where they actually fast. And of course, it's a supervised fast, but people that are obese that come to New Start, hopefully this won't discourage any of you from coming there if you need it. It'll be well worth it if it saves your life from COVID or cancer or other things. By the way, obesity it doesn't just increase the risk of COVID deaths, it also increases the risk of us getting cancer for similar reasons. Our immune system is not as good, and it can't pick up on that. And of course, it increases the risk of heart disease and other issues here. But they will actually fast you for 3 days. And it's a 3-day water fast. And it's pretty amazing. Most people think, I'm going to die. They think that they'll think even 1 day. You know, I've interviewed some of the patients, have you ever fasted for an entire day of your life? I've never missed a meal my entire life, much less gone a whole day. Are you kidding? What am I going to do? And so, of course, we feed them at first. When they first get there, we have a nice meal. We give them a little taste of what they're going to get when they're through with the fast so that they're willing to go through it. But then it's a supervised fast, and you see them walking, you see them exercising, you see them listening to lectures, they're taking notes, and they realize I wasn't near as dependent on food as I thought I was. I'm still able to function and do pretty well. And then after that fast is over with, they put them on a daily fast. And that daily fast is where they eat breakfast, they eat lunch, it's kind of a late lunch. In the New Start program, they eat breakfast, I think, at 8 o'clock in the morning. And they eat their lunch at 2, so they're done certainly by 3. And that's it, 2-meal-a-day program. So they're fasting for 17 hours. And that 17-hour ketosis actually improves brain-derived neurotrophic factor. You'll see the immune system pick up. And it becomes a lot easier. And after they're on this about a week, they're not even hungry in the evening. And it's nice. And it's actually makes it fairly easy to get on a program where you can have an ultimate goal of having a BMI at least under 22. Okay, the V. The V, what do you think that might stand for? This is something that will also have a role to play, whether you're in that 90% that gets COVID and doesn't end up in the hospital. Vitamin, particularly deficiencies. So, let's see. I think I need to, we can just say, shorten it with this. What vitamin do you think has been shown to be the #1 vitamin? It is vitamin D. Yes. And vitamin D is not something we get from food. Where do we get it from? We get it from the sun. Sunlight is very good. And this time of year, it's great. The only problem this time of year in Oklahoma, it's so hot out that you don't want to be out in getting that direct sun. So often it's good to be out there at Lake Murray or, some pool somewhere or something and getting your vitamin D that way. But if you're indoors all day long, like I have to be, I used to say it would sure be nice if I could do colonoscopies outside. The patient would benefit, and I would benefit. But when you're indoors, you really need to consider taking a vitamin D supplement or at least seeing what your vitamin D level is. And this is something that's made such a difference. Some of the preliminary data on treating COVID is that this is the first thing we should do if they do come into the hospital, is give them maybe even IV vitamin D to get their D levels up and get their immune system helping to fight this disease. So vitamin D is a crucial one. What else do you think might be crucial? Vitamin C also, theoretically, can help us out. It's a potent antioxidant vitamin and very cheap. Very easy to get, and vitamin C you get from your raw foods. This is why it's good to eat some raw. because when you cook the food, over half of the vitamin C goes away. So this is where your fruits are good, and even some of your raw vegetables. Raw broccoli has quite a bit of vitamin C, for instance. And then there are some other things that have been shown that are helpful in counteracting COVID. What else might we put on this list, or at least close to it? Yes. So someone mentioned zinc. Zinc actually, when we get it into the cell, it actually stops replicase, which is what this virus takes over to try to replicate itself. So we need to have zinc on board, and we need to get zinc into the cell. And there are natural ways of getting zinc into the cell. One of them that hasn't been broadcast a lot is called quercetin. Quercetin is a bioflavonoid. It comes from the skin of grapes, but you can get this actually over the counter. And often it comes with vitamin C. They'll put vitamin C and quercetin together, and if you're getting zinc with the quercetin, it increases the intracellular zinc levels by over 5-fold of getting something like quercetin on board. And it's very, very simple to be able to get that. Quercetin also, we use that a lot in allergies. I've had a lot of patients that have this allergic rhinitis or asthma-type symptoms, and they're asking me, what can I do naturally for this? Quercetin is one of those things. It can make a big difference within a week. And the runny nose and all this rhinitis stuff can go away, and it's helping out on the, of course, there's a lot of overlap between allergy and immunology. And by the way, if you're wanting to know more about this, this is something also the media doesn't say. It won't be on the CDC. It won't be on other places. But this was a scientific study taking a look at what is the most accurate source. If you want to get non-biased, balanced information regarding COVID, it actually took a look at the top 300 videos by scientists on COVID. And then it did an Oxford tool. Oxford has a tool to know whether this is accurate information or not. There's 15 different ways that you can analyze things to know whether it's accurate or not. And at the top of all of the COVID information is Dr. Schwelt. Now, the media won't mention him because he's balanced. He's not going to be into trying to push some sort of agenda this way or push it the other way. And he's going to do things that are purely based on the science. He's very much into the science part of things. And you might look at he has a site called MedCram. And MedCram is actually, he's teaching medical students and PA students to know their material well enough to be able to pass boards. And so that's how his site actually started. He's an ICU doctor, and he treats a lot of COVID. And every couple days, he comes out with a new COVID update, and he shows you where the science is at. And actually, the top #1 scientific video, Dr. Schwelt. The #2 scientific video, Dr. Schwelt. The #3 top scientific video, Dr. Schwelt. And then further down on the list, using like the Oxford tool, finally, when you got rid of the Schwelt videos, the next video that was seen to be most scientific was the American Medical Association interviewing Dr. Fauci. And so Dr. Fauci is thought to be the expert. By the way, he doesn't treat any COVID patients like Dr. Schwelt at all. Hasn't treated patients for many, many years. And he's thought to be, by the media organization, as your #1 top infectious disease expert. But according to the Oxford tool and who is the most scientific, Dr. Schwelt beats Fauci in the AMA. And so just something of interest, and you can easily find it. Just look at COVID updates and Dr. Schwelt, and he has millions of hits. There are people that are knowledgeable and wanting to get a nice knowledgeable source, and they have found Dr. Schwelt. And so, and of course, it's pretty entertaining stuff. He's a very good teacher. He'll really help you to learn your stuff very well. But Dr. Schwelt, I asked him the other day, he and I know each other, he's actually coming to Weimar Institute for a colloquium in November to teach all of our students. And of course we have a pre-med program and a nursing program and all of those things at Weimar. But I asked him, I said, you know, you're getting 50 million hits on your videos. What's going on? He says, sporting events have closed, and the new sporting event is good information on COVID. And so, but anyways, he will also go into the data on this so that you can see. He talks about all of these things as well. And I've seen a significant difference in utilizing these things in my outpatients particularly. When an outpatient comes down with COVID, I'm doing whatever I can to try to get them not to be in the hospital. Instead of just telling them to go home and hope for the best, and hopefully you don't have to come back, there are definite things that you can do. And adding on to this, someone mentioned NAC. Now, NAC has not yet been tested in COVID. NAC is called N-acetylcysteine. And it is a natural substance. It comes from an amino acid. Actually, it's two different amino acids that come together. But it's one of the most potent antioxidants. NAC has been around there for a long time. And it's used in the hospital a lot, particularly if someone comes in with an overdose of Tylenol. A lot of people actually try to kill themselves by taking a whole bottle of Tylenol. And Tylenol is very toxic to the liver, and it would kill them. There's only one antidote that prevents them from dying from a Tylenol overdose, and that is N-acetylcysteine. It's such a potent antioxidant that it totally prevents the damage of Tylenol by building up the cellular defense mechanism, and you won't actually even get much damage to your liver if you're caught soon enough after a Tylenol overdosage. And most people are caught in time, and so they're spared that death, but they have to take the NAC 17 different times during that hospitalization. Every 4 hours, they're giving them a lot of NAC. But where NAC got its also popularity was in the flu. We know this was a nice randomized controlled trial, and it shows that if you're taking NAC at the time you come across the flu, 77% chance you will not develop one symptom of the flu. You won't even know that you had it. You will have had it because your immune system recognized it and it fought it off that quickly. And so you didn't really develop any symptoms. And so NAC, it's very inexpensive. About 1,200 milligrams a day is what you would need, and it certainly builds up your cellular defense. So if you happen to go into this cytokine storm, your defense of your intracellular level will be so high that it won't kill you, and you'll have a lot of reserves that are left in regards to NAC. So there may be some other things that help as well. Again, this is the flu, but interestingly with the flu, elderberry, like an elderberry syrup. And there's ways that you can make that have been shown to be very healthy to have on board if you come across a bad virus or an infection. And so there may be other things that we could add on to this vitamin and mineral list. Any questions about these first three? Yes. Okay. Yeah, very good question. Why do some people make more D from the sun than other people? Well, there are several factors. In fact, this was studied in Hawaii surfers. You know, Hawaii's in a tropical region, and they're out there surfing all day. And it turns out these surfers don't get much vitamin D. Why is that? It turns out we make it right underneath the skin. And when we have the ocean washing this skin off, it's actually washing the vitamin D off. And the same is true when we perspire outside. So if you're perspiring with you're getting your vitamin D, you're actually washing that vitamin D out from underneath that skin. There's also other factors as well. If we are stressed and out in the sun, the studies show we won't make vitamin D. We'll be getting it, but our stress actually blocks the formation of it getting up there. And there may be other factors as well. So it's actually best when we're not perspiring. It's best when we're just relaxing and having a good time. And then we're able to get more vitamin D that way than if we're working outside really hard and under stressful situations. We don't tend to make as much. And so even individuals that are outside, they might need to take some vitamin D. And so that's why I would recommend, as far as everyone getting a vitamin level, there's probably 2 vitamin levels we'd recommend, but number 1 is vitamin D, and number 2 is B12 because so many people are deficient in B12. 20% of our population is deficient in B12, and even more than that are deficient in vitamin D. So those are 2 very good vitamin levels to get when you go to your doctor and check those 2 things out. So the eye has been going up quite a bit in our society, and it's not helping us if we come in contact with COVID, and it's insomnia. If we're not getting good rest at night, and by the way, individuals that are tuned into their news every day and seeing the discord in this world and worrying about the future and trying to do what they can to stay isolated from people so they don't get COVID, these individuals are sitting ducks. And I can tell you, it was actually it was someone close to home. It was my sister's husband's father. But he was an elderly man, and when this COVID thing hit, he was used to getting out every day, going place, reading a restaurant. He went to the same shop every morning. I think it was some sort of coffee breakfast shop. And he was used to working outside in his garden every day. And he was living a very good life for someone in their 90s. But he would also watch the evening news every night. And so when he watched the evening news and found out about COVID, he quit going out. He actually quit going outside of his house to even do gardening. And when people would come over, it's like, no, I shouldn't be seeing you. I shouldn't be talking to you. He wasn't exposed to virtually anything, but within 3 weeks of changing his lifestyle this way, he contracted a virus that was not COVID. It's probably something his body had been fighting off just fine with everything that he had going on. But now with the insomnia, now with the worry, now with the stress, and now not going outside, not getting the sun, not going out to the social places, he died from a non-COVID infection that would not have happened had he not worried so much about it. And had he just trying to do everything to try to continue to live. So insomnia is at an all-time high in our nation. And what can we do about it if we have it? Eliminate caffeine. Yes. Caffeine has a half-life of 6 hours, so even if you have your cup of coffee in the morning, there's still 6 milligrams on board in the evening, and it can cause some issues. And if you have more than 1 cup, it can be a significant issue. What else can we do? Turn off your TV. Yeah. Get your news from, if you need to get your news, I have found out it's much better to get it from, some balanced, reliable sources. If I really want to learn what's going on COVID and I haven't kept up for a few days, I'm going to actually go to Dr. Schwaltz MedCram and see his COVID update myself. And I don't have to filter through all of this, all of these politically charged things that are happening to try to produce a certain end result in this whole system. You want to get someone who's non-biased and is going to be really giving you the straight scoop in regards to, and so it's good to find places like that. If you're wanting to know what to do with nutrition or disease things, nutritionfacts.org. It's one of the most scientific sites on the internet regarding nutrition, probably the most, because it's quoting peer-reviewed research, and it's done very well. And so get your sources from that instead of doing the easy thing and letting somebody else filter out the news that you should see and the news that you shouldn't see. What I've noticed is when you sit down and watch the evening news, the most important news that happened that day is never mentioned. And things that are not as important are mentioned as big, giant items often. And so they tend to major and minors, and minor and majors. And when that happens and we have that all filtered, we can get into anxiety. And we can get into insomnia, and we can get this idea that there's nothing we can do about anything, that we're just totally helpless and we're going to be victims and that sort of thing. So very good. I like that, turning off the news. Anyone else? What? Yes, a regular schedule. And what's the best schedule as far as getting the best sleep?
Early to bed, early to rise.
It's early to bed, early to rise. We make more melatonin that way. And by the way, this is a big thing. This is why we don't want insomnia. But melatonin has actually been shown to be very healthy and COVID, a good COVID treatment as well. Melatonin is actually, we talk about vitamin D in the immune system, but as far as the antioxidant vitamin, we haven't mentioned it yet. What's the most potent antioxidant vitamin? It's vitamin E. Vitamin E is the most potent. 30 times more potent than vitamin E is melatonin. And melatonin is something that will really help us if we happen to contract COVID. And you'll make double the melatonin if you go to bed at 9 o'clock and get up at 5 a.m. than if you're going to bed at midnight and getting up at 8 a.m. And so this is why they'll talk about with melatonin, 4 hours good, or 2 hours good sleep before midnight is worth more than 4 hours after midnight. And you'll see this pattern in very healthy, successful individuals, early to bed, early to rise, except when it comes to entertainers. Entertainers, of course, they entertain in the evening. And so, but entertainers have lots of emotional and health issues in part because their melatonin levels are so low. But in general, most occupations that are non-entertainment based, you'll find the ones that tend to excel the most are the early to bed, early to risers. And this is that melatonin advantage. By the way, there are some foods that have melatonin in them. Oats are one of the highest. Bananas are pretty good. But we've actually, tomatoes have melatonin, but there's 2 foods recently. They haven't measured melatonin of all of them. There's 2 foods recently that found out to have even more than those that we mentioned. Tart cherries, and even higher than tart cherries, in fact, 2 nuts will have a 0.5 milligram of melatonin, and these are pistachios. So pistachios have melatonin in them as well. And
Is melatonin called also like the healing hormone? Is that
yes, it's kind of the fix.
healing hormone to me?
Yeah. Yeah, it could be called that. I call it the fix and rejuvenate nighttime hormone. So it does fix things and it helps you be rejuvenated to have that melatonin. How much melatonin do you need? Well, let me tell you, the amount that your brain makes is the best. But as far as melatonin is concerned, if you were to take it exogenously, because that's something that you could also do, is to take it, there's melatonin pills. Yeah, you would want to make sure that it's a reputable manufacturer making those melatonin pills because it's not regulated by the FDA. And we have found out that a lot of supplement manufacturers that say they have melatonin, they look for it, there's not even melatonin in there. And then there might be other impurities and things. So you want to have a nutraceutical type company. But you don't need any more than 3 milligrams. And often you'll need less if you cut that 3 milligrams in a quarter, pulverize it, and put it under your tongue. You absorb it much better sublingually than actually swallowing the melatonin because your stomach acid will break it down. And so the sublingual melatonin, it can also help you with sleep if you're having problems with sleep. That's one of the natural sleep aids, is actually taking some sublingual melatonin and then trying to relax and get your mind on more positive things. All right, the D. Well, diet, yes, we could put diet in there. And we've already been mentioning diet to some extent. The best diet for our immune system is going to be plant-based, high in antioxidants, low in arachidonic acid. Arachidonic acid is pro-inflammatory. We don't want too much inflammation when we get COVID. And meat and eggs and fish are going to be high in arachidonic acid. In fact, virtually all the anti-inflammatories, they try to block arachidonic acid metabolism. And by blocking it, they cause a lot of side effects and other problems. Much better way than blocking the arachidonic acid that we eat is to just not eat it. And arachidonic acid is not present in fruits, grains, nuts, and vegetables. So it's a very anti-inflammatory diet to have that plant-based diet. So that would be important. But also something that I've also mentioned very much related to suppression of the immune system is depression itself. It's good to take one of these screening tests to see whether you might have depression. Depression increases, and depression can occur in any age, but when we have depression, we actually increase our risk of death in a lot of ways besides just suicide. The world focuses in on depression increasing the risk of suicide, which it does, but depression increases the risk of a lot of other diseases, including suppression of our immune system. It increases the risk of death from pneumonia. It increases the risk of death from a lot of different perspectives. And so we want to make sure that our mental health is in good shape. Today, there's a 19-year-old young man from University of Michigan. His parents were just searching the internet trying to find natural treatments for anxiety and depression. But he came across a book, and he had to read it for sociology class in University of Michigan, called Winners Take All. And his parents were telling me that prior to this, he had no depression. He had no anxiety, but he read Winners Take All, and he read another book that was all about the bad system of America and the disproportion and the disequality, and how this system has produced all of this, and how it was just a book that told you about all the problems, but it had no solutions. And with no solutions and all the problems, he was thinking, I want to solve the problems of the world, and how am I going to solve all this? And his mind was just totally engrossed in these things that he had read. And his parents said prior to doing that, he didn't have no signs of depression or anxiety. So, but it's significant enough that he's probably going to be coming with his mother to our program next week. We have a program starting next week. But only the best thing he can do for himself long term, because we're going to be able to help him in regards to, let's find out what are things that can do. I tried to give him a first consult and today by giving him some perspective. This is another thing that I don't necessarily appreciate by some of these debates we have going on today, because the number one problem in all the world is virtually never mentioned by the Republicans, the Democrats, the president, or any of these other things, or any of these other media outlets. They totally ignore it. But the number one problem in all the world is actually lack of comprehensive self-control on an individual level. And, once we learn these principles, and if we're not doing them, it's going to be due to lack of comprehensive self-control. And comprehensive self-control can help us out individually. It can help us out collectively in so many ways. And comprehensive self-control is something that we can actually build. There's ways of being able to improve this. And I mentioned to him, and this is Baumeister, this isn't me. Dr. Baumeister is now the most quoted researcher in all the world, is from Stanford University, and he makes a very eloquent case that our immigration issues, our issues with the police in cities, our issues with disparities on this side or on that side sink into insignificance when we compare them with the problems that are due to lack of comprehensive self-control. And that's something that the young kid actually can do something about. And he can actually learn some things to help others. And this is something that will help them a whole lot more than trying to get involved in politics to change a system that no one really has identified precisely what's wrong with it or what needs to be fixed precisely. Often they don't talk about what laws, if the system is a problem, what laws need to be changed. Let's talk about the laws that need to be changed. Let's talk about those things. But often we're just fed the problems, but just said we're given this idea that it's so endemic and systemic that there's nothing that can be done about it. And it causes things like this in young people. Depression is at a much higher rate than it's ever been before. But even more common than reading books like this causing depression is actually getting on devices. And the more you're on devices, the higher your risk of mental health problems. And we have much less face-to-face social interaction and much more interaction with devices. And with COVID, it's actually gotten worse. Everyone's taking Zoom classes and not having this face-to-face interaction, which is actually healthy for us in preventing and treating depression. So if we can take care of these issues here and also worry about the COVID protection, I'm not wearing a mask up here. I'm 6 feet away, but I'm doing that so that you guys can understand me as well. I know it's very difficult for some individuals to hear you unless they can read your lips along with it. So that's why I'm not wearing it up here. But it actually is good when COVID is around and when we know it's around to go through appropriate protective mechanisms that are not just hunkering down at home and not going outside at all. We don't want to get to that extreme because we're going to cause a lot more problems than we end up solving that way. So that's a brief, I say somewhat brief because I think I've been talking about an hour, maybe a little less. But I'd like to open it up for questions, and then I'll turn it over to Pastor Schmidt. Yes?
Is a face shield a good substitute for a mask in the marketplace and in public?
Is a face shield a good substitute for a mask? The face shield, of course, the idea of the face shield is it can also protect your eyes. And so you get eyes and nose and mouth protection. I know in regards to if we actually know we're being exposed in close proximity to a COVID patient, it's going to be more than a face shield. We'll have the face shield and an N95 mask on top of it and eyewear. And it really depends on the mask. I would say if you just have a typical face covering that's not a very good mask, it might be better than a lot of masks that are out there. It's probably not going to be better than an N95 mask. But good question, yes.
Does having COVID confer immunity against subsequent infection?
Yes, does having a COVID infection confer immunity against future infections? We're all hoping that's the case. And this country's invested in vaccines. Vaccines would not work if that were not the case. And so there is evidence that if you have a COVID infection, your immune system should be able to fight off virtually any other COVID infection for at least several months and probably several years. But we don't know that to be sure and certain. And of course, the whole vaccine business. By the way, don't necessarily look for vaccines to control this. A lot of people think the solution is to stay at home until the vaccine comes out. This is an RNA vaccine, by the way. It's an RNA virus. And RNA viruses do not have a good history as far as good vaccines. The AIDS virus, they spent literally millions and millions of dollars trying to develop an AIDS virus vaccine. There's no good AIDS virus vaccine out there. It's an RNA virus. The flu virus is an RNA virus. The flu virus, they've been missing it quite a bit. You have to take the flu shot, but people are coming down with the flu because it's not that good of a vaccine. It can probably help you some. It can help you to not maybe go into the cytokine storm if you've gotten it, but you're still going to get pretty sick. And there are deaths every year from people who've been vaccinated against the flu, and it's a flu-related death. So it's telling us it's not all that effective. And so with COVID being an RNA vaccine, I'm not looking for the vaccine to end this whole crisis. Hopefully they're that good that they develop one where it might do that, but the chance of that happening is slim to none. And so where the money is going to, where your best money is at is actually on doing these things. This is going to be a lot better than actually being vaccinated as far as preventing problems down the road. But if you do have it, yes, you should be immune from it for a while. Yes?
How many milligrams of the D3 and the vitamin C do you recommend on a daily basis? And how long does it stay in your system?
Yeah, vitamin C, we normally recommend about 1,000 milligrams twice a day if you're trying to prevent something like COVID. It doesn't need to be a huge amount. So a little bit can do the trick. Vitamin D, if your vitamin D levels are already stable, we would recommend about 5,000 units a day as being a good value. What's that?
Vitamin C tablets, do they stay like 4 hours in your system?
Yeah, they'll stay in there for a little bit longer than that. It does go down over time. But if you take the vitamin C twice a day, that's normally enough to keep your vitamin C levels up pretty much the time. Good, good, yeah. So 5,000 units of D, 1,000 of C, and zinc. Zinc, if you know you're under exposure, I would take at least 50 milligrams twice a day. And you can get a little zinc acetate lozenge. It's actually pretty tasty, and zinc is pretty much toxic to the virus on contact as well. And so if you knew that you come across exposure, you can actually chew the zinc acetate and let it hang around in your mouth. That's why zinc coldies was shown to be effective, is because you're actually sucking on the zinc and you're getting in contact with the virus in your mouth and in your pharynx area. But 50 milligrams twice a day is a good level if you know you've been exposed. If you haven't been exposed, I would take at least 40 milligrams a day. That's kind of the minimum for zinc to be effective. And quercetin, that would be like 500 milligrams twice a day, even 1,000 milligrams twice a day. Yes, question in the back.
Yeah, just looking at the list, I don't know that we talked a whole lot about like exercise, but obesity, insomnia, depression, like that would be a good.
Exactly. Exercise can help with all of those. Very good point. And physical exercise does help your immune system significantly. And it can help ward off against a whole lot of viruses and infections. So, and the studies show the more the better, but if you want to have an optimal immune system, studies are showing an hour of aerobic exercise a day is probably what we need. And so that's quite a bit. It's not just going out for, a half-mile walk. That's better than nothing. But it's far better to actually get some good endurance fitness, and to have it last an entire hour is a great plan. Very good, thank you. Yes?
When you say vitamin D3 or which one?
Okay, yes, there's D2 and there's D3. So let me explain a little bit of the difference. D2 is called ergocalciferol, and ergocalciferol can actually come from plants. And it has to go through your kidneys to be activated to D3. So D2 turns into D3. Where I like D2, sometimes I use D2. In our patients that are very deficient in vitamin D that come into our programs, I will give them a prescription dose of D2, like 50,000 units. 50,000 units, and they'll have to take it with food. Vitamin D is fat soluble, so you want to take it with food, otherwise you don't absorb it. And they might need to take that every other day for 6 or 7 days to get it up there. Now, D2 is not toxic because it will convert over the amount that we need. D3 can be toxic. So if you don't know your D3 level and you're taking 10,000 units a day, you can actually get toxic on that if you already have enough D on board. And so in D3 is called cholecalciferol, And most of the D3 comes from animal base. You know, you've heard of cholecystitis. That's the gallbladder. Chole kind of means bile. That's what it literally means, is bile. And so it tends to come from animal liver, although most of the D3 now comes from sheep skin. Sheep make it under their skin as well. And so you'll even smell the sheep sweat sometimes in getting that vitamin D3. You can find plant-based sources of D3, and that's the preferred. So if I'm going to give D3 like 5,000 units a day, I'll look for a plant-based source of D3. It's harder to find, but it's worth it as far as preventing some of the issues that can come from the animals. And ergocalciferol normally comes from mushrooms. It's a plant-based vitamin. Well, you've been a very attentive group. Yes?
One question, what's the influence of age on that? If you do all these things and you're a person in your 80s, are you at a higher risk? Or does it
Oh, yeah. So what happens, you know, we know about age on this. In fact, if you would look at this report here, let's go down on the deaths. Well, no, let's go back up. If we look at the amount of deaths, yeah, you can see the 65 and up are where most of the deaths are at, but there is even deaths between 5 and 17. But let's go up further. Where was it that it said nursing home? Out of those 500 and some deaths, I saw it earlier, it tells how many were from nursing homes. Essentially, half of those are patients from nursing homes. But are you doomed? Where 243, yeah, from long-term care facilities or nursing homes. So if you're not in a nursing home, you got a decent chance if you get this disease. And if you're doing all of these things, you're going to be 100%. You're going to be able to get COVID. It'll be like getting a vaccine. You know, you'll be able to develop antibodies from this, and you're going to be all right. But we can't guarantee it unless you're really paying attention to all of these things. And that's why it's worth having presentations like this and spreading the information out, because there's much that we can do to prevent this illness. And what if you're 100? I was taking care of a 100-year-old patient in the hospital just last week with COVID. And that 100-year-old, she still had her mind. She still was with the program. But when she came in, everyone thought she was doomed. 100 getting COVID, there's just no way she's going to survive. Well, we put her on vitamin D. We put her on some of these things. We never had to give her more than 2.5 liters of oxygen. And we discharged her last week from the hospital. 100-year-old survivor of COVID. And so even if you're old, if you're paying attention to these measures, you're going to be in good shape. And so I want to encourage you along these things. And, you know, as far as this sort of thing, well, you know, I should mention this before closing. With the insomnia, with the depression, with the media, with all these things to get worried about that are going on in our country, one of the things that really helps all of these things is what Colossians, the book of Colossians, says in chapter 3, where it says, set your affections on things above. You know, even when Christ was here on this earth, it said he rose up a great while before day, went out to a solitary place, and there prayed. And so if we can set our affections on things that are above every day, we can get ourselves off of this nonsense sometimes that occurs in our world and start majoring in majors. And when we start majoring in majors and set our affections on things above, not on things of the earth, it can make a big difference, even in regards to our immune system and our overall health. Well, I hope this has been helpful to all of you, and thank you for inviting me, and it's great to be back in Ardmore again.